Hey everybody, it's Felisa. Today is going to be an entry into vlogmas, Christmas time, murder, mystery, and mayhem. Today's story I became aware of, oh gosh, about 8 years ago now. It was a story that was baffling then. It still remains a story that's baffling and sad and all those kinds of things. I still can't find any cohesive information. They've tried to piece it together as best they can. We obviously know the outcome. We just don't know all of the events that led up to the outcome. And so that is why it remains such a mystery. The story is about Joyce Carol Vincent, who was discovered on January 25th, 2006, dead in her apartment. Apparently, she had been behind on her rent, and so they went to evict her. And when they gained entry into her apartment, they discovered skeletal remains on the sofa. They also noticed that the television was still playing in the corner, but there was a huge mountain of mail behind the apartment door. Now, I just have to assume that her apartment was probably designed like with the mail slot in the door. So the postman was probably just coming by, depositing the mail in the slot, and didn't realize that it was accumulating on the other side. They took a look around the apartment, and then they looked in her refrigerator and they noticed that food in her refrigerator expired all in 2003. And I think that that was the first kind of timeline that they were able to connect, that this person, whoever it was, at that time they didn't know, had been deceased at least 3 years based upon the contents of the refrigerator. The body was so badly decomposed that it could only be identified by dental records, and there was an old picture of Joyce smiling, and so they were able to also make a match that way, and that is how they realized that it was Joyce Carol Vincent. The news quickly went viral, I'm gonna say. People were all wondering how this could happen, as did I. London is about 8 million strong, and everybody wondered how on earth does something like this go unnoticed in a city this size and go unnoticed for so long. And so it was in the press for a very long time, and then, as most news cycles are, when the next thing came along, it kind of dissipated and fell off the radar. So there was a filmmaker who decided that she wanted to look into the story and find out some information. And what she was able to put together, the portion that was revealed, was that Joyce Vincent was 38 when she died. She had been born in West London. Her parents were from the Caribbean. Some of her parents attended her, they call it an inquest. I'm assuming that that's like an autopsy. I should have looked that up before, but I'm assuming that that's like our equivalent, or the equivalent of the state's autopsy. There was some reports that suggested that she had been at least engaged before she went to live in her apartment, but that she had also been living in a shelter for victims of domestic violence. Now, it's not implicitly stated what that timeline is. Like, was she engaged and then something happened with her then fiance and she fled that situation, lived in the shelter, and then was able to be in an apartment? That timeline sounds pretty plausible to me, because you would think that if she were still engaged, that whoever she was engaged to would come looking for her, or be visiting her, and there would be no way for her to languish for 3 years. But then on the other hand, I mean, she had a whole entire family, and still nobody found her for 3 years. So I'm not quite sure what that timeline was, but she didn't fit the typical profile of somebody who would die and be forgotten. Like, she wasn't elderly, she was still very young, she wasn't without family, she wasn't necessarily a loner, she wasn't a drug addict, she wasn't an isolated heavy drinker. Who she was and how she met the circumstances of her death, the way she died, is where the mystery lies. So this particular filmmaker put advertisements with various publications and internet sites. She wanted to really kind of figure out exactly who she was, and maybe hear from some people who were if not close to her, maybe worked with her or knew her. And so she put out all these flyers, do you know Joyce Vincent? And waited for a response. She did get a response from someone that had worked with Joyce and, um, kind of had an interview there. She also found out from the the coroner's office that her death was uncertain. It was unascertained. So nobody knows whether or not she isolated herself, or if it was just a sudden onset, or what exactly happened. It's all just very, very baffling. I do think that there's always, the there's always the potential or the possibility that there's something that wasn't implicitly said or wasn't implicitly investigated. I mean, this could have been a death by suicide, and because it had been so long, it was very difficult to figure out what the cause of death was. It was stated that she had slowly been pulling herself away from her friends and family. She hadn't been really engaging much. She hadn't been, doing too much of anything. One of the people that was able to give kind of like some firsthand knowledge was a man named Martin Lister. He had seen the advertisement and he wrote to the person that did the documentary, because he found out that Joyce was deceased, and he was hoping that it wasn't the same Joyce that he had gone out with in his 20s. Well, they quickly established that it was, and when they were on the phone, he said it just didn't add up. She never drank, she never took drugs, and the thing that really stood out to him was that she wound up in social housing, which I'm assuming is a shelter. I have to kind of try and convert the UK definitions of things, or the way that they use their verbiage, to what the way that we know it. So I think that means, social housing, meaning that she was either in a shelter or maybe public housing. At any rate, this was just bizarre, to say the least. And she did have some close relationships. She did have some close friends. She obviously dated at some point, but it was not connective or cohesive enough for people to really realize that she had slipped off the radar, which, again, I keep going back to, like, that's so baffling. Like, I don't know how easy or how difficult it is to really extract yourself from relationships. I mean, I have kids, so clearly me going off the radar or going off the grid is going to look very different than someone who doesn't have kids or doesn't have that connectivity. I know that it can be done, but I just, for the life of me, it just feels so odd that nobody came looking for her. Nobody, people just treated the fact that she was no longer around like it was the most perfectly normal thing ever. And I don't know exactly, what the rationale was with her parents or with her family, because obviously they were still around. Maybe they had a falling out, and weren't necessarily in contact when she passed away. That's, one theory, I guess, or, one way to kind of figure out, well, that why wouldn't you get in contact with someone? And perhaps they didn't know how to get in contact with her, especially if she had moved from a shelter into this housing arrangement and hadn't updated her relatives with where she was going to be. I also remember reading that the whole reason that it took so long to do the eviction was because she had automatic payments set up. So her electricity and all her, her other utilities and her rent were coming out of this this bank account. And so when the bank account obviously ran out and couldn't continue to pay the bills, that's when it triggered a past due kind of warning, and they would have come in to find her. No matter what happened, I think that this is a perfectly sad way to end your life, to come to the end of your life. Obviously she was preparing for Christmas in some type of way. She had Christmas presents that were unopened. I don't know if those were hers or if she was planning on giving them to someone, but either way, if someone gave them to her, then someone would have seen her before she passed away, which again goes back to how could you be missing and nobody miss you? Like, that's so sad and so bizarre to me. Or, maybe those were Christmas presents for other people in her life, and whoever she was going to give them to, I wonder why they didn't miss her and come looking for her. At any rate, that is the story of Joyce Carol Vincent. I really encourage you to watch the documentary because she does a really deep dive into, her name is Carol Morley. I'm sorry, I never mentioned her name. The filmmaker's name is Carol Morley, and she does a fairly deep dive into Joyce's life, talks to, like I said, some of her ex-boyfriends, talks to people that knew her, and, they all are baffled as to how this actually happened, but it's very nice to humanize Joyce and, put life into a picture, because they do have pictures of her, but put life into a picture and humanize her in such a way where she's not just an epithet. She's not just, the final, this weirdness that happened with her, to kind of fill in the gaps of her life. I'll leave the name of the documentary in the comments because I know that I'm going to butcher it. It's A Dream something. I want to say it came out like 2011. I haven't seen it in a while. Maybe I'll watch that this weekend. But I was thinking about it as I was out today, and I was like, I think I want to profile that because it truly is a mystery. It did happen around Christmas time, or we think that it happened around Christmas time because, of course, she wasn't found until years later. But based upon the Christmas presents that she had in the house, we think that it was around Christmas time, so that makes it a Christmas time mystery. I'm Felisa. I hope that you enjoyed this tale, and I hope that you all are doing well. Leave your comments below if you get a chance to watch the documentary. I love what your thoughts are on the matter. If you know about this story, if you have some additional insight or some additional theories, I'd love to hear that too. Y'all have a safe day. Bye-bye.